Welcome to Geopolitics and Empire. Support the podcast. As always, leave a podcast review anywhere you're listening, particularly on the podcast players, Apple, Spotify, Castbox, Podbean. I do try to leave a podcast review if you can. That helps a lot. Returning to the podcast, it's been quite a few years, is Dutch political economist Kees van der Pijl, who's taught at the University of Amsterdam and Sussex. He's the author of numerous books. Years ago, we discussed his absolutely must-read book, States of Emergency, Keeping the Global Population in Check, on what had been a popular podcast episode. I even remember one of my other podcast guests, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, viewing that, enjoying it, and sharing it. Welcome back, Kees. How's life?
Yeah. Well, interesting times, in the double Chinese meaning of being full of events, but also fear-inspiring. There are many things going on, and in many places there are decision makers that we must be very fearful of. I think Israel and the United States really are playing high stakes, and in the case of Israel, that involves its very existence. And in the case of the United States, it might involve a complete collapse of its military status, certainly in the Middle East.
So, yeah, perhaps just to expound on that, and that's where I was going to start. Iran, Israel, USA, Gaza. We have Netanyahu coming out recently and stating that what they are doing by clearing out Iran is becoming not just a regional power, but Israel is becoming a global power. And I can see it going both ways. In many respects, US, Israel have been on a rampage, winning in many respects. Everything we see, Venezuela, Greenland, to an extent in the Middle East, but I can see them continuing to have the success, or as you say, collapsing. So what are some of the things you're looking at in this conflict that's important for you?
Well, it's obvious that Iran really cannot be defeated, as far as I can see, and listening to knowledgeable commentators, because they have 90 million people. I fear that most of what is above ground will be destroyed in the coming year. I guess the war, although Israel and the United States want to get out of it by all signs, Iran is not getting out of it and has actually issued an ultimatum in which they say that the United States must withdraw from the Middle East entirely and vacate its military bases and pay 500 billion in damages to Iran. And there was a third demand that I forgot now, but it's also, these are very maximal demands, which I think what I heard from several observers is that Iran will be trying to gain control over the southern half of the Arabian Peninsula to get a contiguous zone of influence that will allow it to be in direct contact with the Houthis in Yemen. And it would not surprise me if that is what happened. And one of the last things that I saw was a call by the Iranians to the peoples of the Arab family monarchies, these dynasties, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar, to rise up. So just as Israel and the United States are calling on the Iranians to come out in the streets, that is also what Iran is doing, vice versa, except that the people who came out into the streets in Iran came out in support of the regime. Because as far as I know, and I'm amazed that the American authorities are not aware of this mechanism, But whatever opposition you have in a particular country, once you attack that country, the opposition will fall in line with everybody to defend their homeland. That was so in Yugoslavia in 1990 and 99. You know, when there was the war in Kosovo. The opposition against Milosevic, which was strong, yet supported Yugoslavia when it was attacked by NATO. And now you see that whatever opposition there is in Iran also rallied to the flag once the bombs started falling. So in that sense, Iran is, it is very difficult to imagine that Iran would, for instance, surrender or capitulate to the US and Israel. They never mention Israel for the simple reason they don't recognize its existence. And I think that the damage that they are inflicting on Iran on Israel is such that Israel will collapse under its weight. Apparently, there's fighting inside Israel. There are persistent rumors that Netanyahu is dead. Several of his henchmen are dead. Ben Gvir, the Minister of National Security, the head of Mossad, and a number of other top figures are all dead. At least we haven't seen them in public. And of Netanyahu, there was an artificially generated address. I don't know whether you've seen that. In which each hand had 6 fingers. So there was a mistake in the AI program, apparently. And he gave a very unnatural speech. It was obviously computer generated. So that would confirm the idea that he's dead. Now, I think that's a secondary phenomenon because however hateful figure he may be, Israel, of course, is not reduced to the figure of Netanyahu, but they are taking a pounding. They have had a direct hit on the Dimona nuclear center. Tel Aviv is severely damaged. The Ben Gurion airport is damaged. And Iran's ability to use its hypersonic missiles against Israel is overwhelming. So missile defense in Israel is at its bottom level now, after the radar installations that the United States was maintaining on the Arabian side of the Persian Gulf have mostly been destroyed. So Israel is now blind, and the type of missile that is coming in is already very difficult to intercept, even with quality radar support.
And as we're recording, I was not aware of those rumors, but I did a quick search, and I am seeing, again, rumors on social media that Netanyahu is could be dead. But I guess we'll see. That remains to be seen. I always like to wait and see what happens.
I agree.
And
but what is not in doubt is that Israel is taking a severe beating for the first time in its existence.
Do you think there's this danger then? Because people talk about nuclear weapons. Many some of the analysts that I follow, I forget who it was recently. Oh, it's not coming to mind. That was saying that BB is ready to deploy. You know, we all know about, what is it, the Samson option. They're saying that Israel would be ready to deploy, you know, at the very least, a tactical nuke. Do you think that is in the realm of play?
Yeah, I fear that is a possibility. But that also requires that the command structure is intact. And I also think that the direct hit that the Iranians scored against the Dimona Nuclear Research Center is a very important sign that the Iranians are aware of this possibility and try to attack the heart of the Israeli nuclear research effort, and also probably the location where most of its nuclear weapons are stored. But I'm not a specialist about how this nuclear center is being maintained. But morally speaking, there's nothing that is beyond Israel to undertake. And don't forget that the military and political leadership in the United States shares some of these apocalyptic visions with Israel about an end of times. You know, the idea that the Messiah will return in a nuclear war. That is an idea of Smotrich, the Minister of Finance of Israel, but also of the group that surrounds Trump, Jared Kushner, Witkoff, and the current Minister of Commerce, Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick. These people are member of the Chabad cult, which is a sect within Zionism, which has this messianic belief. So that's one side, and then for the secular people there is the Samson option, which you already mentioned, and that is simply that if we go, you all go. That's the catchphrase of the Israelis, and I think that's serious. I mean, think of Seymour Hersh's book under that title, the Samsung option. So that's really frightening. Trump is simply a piece of theater because he now went off to a meeting of billionaires in Palm Beach as a sort of holiday outing, whilst Marines are about to invade Iran, and whilst the largest U.S. aircraft carrier is burning.
Yeah, and I make it a point to point out, because I myself, again, I'm Christian, and I believe that these people that you mentioned are very much misconstruing religion. And one of my past podcast guests, Yana Ben Nun, who is, I believe, ethnically Jewish Israeli, and writes on these subjects, he just wrote an article, and it's from the Chabad's own website. It's a different topic, but basically how AI is the new Tower of Babel. And you read the article from Chabad's own website, where the Bible is clear. It says the unification of the world into a one world government, is discussed in the Old Testament, Nimrod, the Tower of Babel, is a bad thing. And in this article on Chabad, they're saying they're flipping it. I mean, it's their own Torah or Old Testament that says that's bad, don't do it. And here they're saying, what's wrong with unifying the world and creating this technological AI Tower of Babel? So I think that's just an example of how many of these groups completely invert and twist religious texts for politics, for political gain. But I did want to ask you about, because since we're talking about nukes, false flag operations, and how many of us, this is not our first rodeo, right? For you, for me, for many listening, 9/11, the global war on terror, Iraq. Now they're talking about drones off the west coast of the United States, sleeper cells coming up through Mexico here to the US. My immediate thought, it's all fake. It's all going to be a false flag operation. That's clear. Do you have any thoughts on that? And if they're going to escalate the war, even Tucker Carlson came out and said, to escalate the war, to get troops on the ground, you will need a massive false flag operation. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah. Well, I just finished a book which is called Israel and 9/11, 25 years of war on terror. And it's already at the publishers now in production in the Dutch version. The English version, I'm still considering, with the help of this Dutch publisher, to see whether we will do it on Amazon or with another publisher. But anyway, I'll leave these details. So I'm really loaded with details on the longer history of how the Zionists in both the United States, so let's say people like Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Pijl and etc., and their counterparts in Israel have been using false flag techniques and also very complex propaganda operations to get their way, to make the United States fight Israel's wars. After 1973, which was a narrow escape for Israel, its fourth major war, conventional war with the Arab neighbors, the idea in Israel arose to let the United States wage Israel's wars from then on. And in 1979, 2 years after the Likud government came into power, there was the first conference in Jerusalem about the idea of a war on terror, that Israel would remain on the sidelines. The United States, with a coalition, an ad hoc coalition, would fight Israel's wars henceforth. And that was when, the famous list was drawn up, of which Iran was the last country to be attacked, but there was a list of 7 countries that they would go and attack in this under this program. Now, that has all taken more time than was originally planned. But in the meantime, major structural changes have taken place. Many people forget that after 1991, when the Soviet Union, its bloc and communism collapsed, the status of Europe in the Atlantic relationship dramatically declined. And it was replaced, in my view, by an Atlantic Zionist connection, in which the Zionists took the place of what used to be the Atlanticists on the European side. From the days of Jean Monnet and the founders of European integration and so on, through NATO, all that was replaced by the Zionist connection on both sides of the Atlantic. And you can say that it took until 2003 that we saw the last act of European resistance to the United States beginning with this fight with this war on terror. And that was the rebellion of people like Chirac and Schröder and Belgium, not to be forgotten, alongside Putin and the Chinese and Brazil and others, protesting the Iraq invasion. Now, after that, you can say Europe declined further and further, and that is why today we see these ridiculous figures at the top of the EU. Think of Ursula von der Leyen, but especially of a figure like Kaja Kallas, who is almost a caricature of somebody in that role. And rather than laughing at her, it's better to see that this means that is signifying our weight in international relations. Europe really has been relegated to a secondary status because it's no longer needed to stop the communist onslaught, between quotation marks, because the relationship on the Atlantic axis has now shifted to the United States and Israel. And this axis is now fighting its last war on the war on terror agenda. And in my book, I won't bother you with this, but in my book, I detail in several chapters the wave of Israeli investments in the United States economy, concentrated in the IT sector and bolstering the triangle of intelligence, media, and Silicon Valley, let us say, which already had a Zionist imprint very much, but which now in the 1990s, when all these companies came over and began to work for the American state apparatus, implanting computer programs everywhere in all public services, also in the top of the military, that allowed them to organize a world historic false flag operation. That was 9/11. And personally, I think that if they want to pull off another false flag in California now with these drones, that there's a lot of talk about that. They still have the apparatus to do that and control an event like that through the computer programs and the backdoors in those programs they installed in the 1990s and early 2000s. So that's a frightening prospect. At the same time, you are right when you say, isn't it so that given the drawbacks to the operation of the United States and Israel against Iran, that they may resort to nuclear weapons, and that is possible. But I think they will hesitate because one part of the official story is still that they went in to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon. So it would be a bit ironic, to use an appropriate term, to use nuclear weapons themselves against a nuclear unarmed state.
Fascinating to hear you're working on that book. Hopefully, it comes out in English. We recently had a guest.
Yeah. It will. The English version was actually finalized first, and I'm now going over once more to get some mistakes out, and then we'll very soon have an English version as well.
I recently
and I'm negotiating. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. We'll look forward to that. I recently had a guest, Brendan O'Connell, for the first time, where he was talking a lot about this. He's been talking about this for 17 years, and so he says that the Israeli companies, coming out of Unit 8200 and all that
exactly
that they own so much of the world's software or electronic choke points and nodes. And then he mentioned an author I'd never heard of. There's just so many people. No one person can keep track of everything. Yeah. But someone called Christopher Bolin. And so now I got his book, and I'm going to be checking it out. I believe he's still alive. And one of my subscribers, who's also a writer, I'm going to give him a shout out, Gary Barnett. I've been reading his stuff for many years on Lou Rockwell. He listens to the podcast, and he messaged me, and he said he already started reading Christopher Bolin. And often it takes a second or third person to recommend the book before you say, okay, now I got to read this. So I think the work of Christopher Bolin, are you familiar with his work, and did you use it as background for your research?
Yeah, because his book, Solving 9/11, which was also self-published on Amazon, was really a source of inspiration for me at some point, I saw a Twitter message in which it was said that Saudis blew up the Twin Towers. And I responded to that just from, I shot from the hip. I responded to that saying, no, Israelis blew up the Twin Towers with help from Zionists and the American government. And that was inspired by having just read Christopher Bolin's first book. And it's a book that is very journalistic. So it's based on reporting, on making telephone calls. And it also leaves out certain very important areas like, let us say, the 9/11 attack on the Pentagon, which he doesn't discuss at all. So in that sense, it's not a scholarly work. It's set up. Christopher Bolin was a real reporter, so he went to all kinds of places to report directly on things. And his book is fascinating and very credible because he reports on his own reporting. But what was needed, in my view, was a scholarly work in the sense that his book has no footnotes. Because if you say I was there, I spoke to, etc., you don't have to make a footnote of that. But in my case, of course, I didn't go anywhere and I didn't speak to anyone. I only read from the piles and piles of books on the topic, but especially its prehistory. This idea of these conferences on organizing a war on terror so that Israel could remain on the sideline and the United States would do the fighting. And once you start there and you take the important mutation of the 1990s, in which, as I said, Europe was relegated to secondary status, which we feel now in every respect, because don't forget that Europe will also be the major loser of the current war in the Middle East, not disregarding Israel for a moment. We will pay the high energy prices more than anyone else, because the Iranians have already made exceptions for passage through the Strait of Hormuz for a whole list of countries that are considered friendly states, like, Pakistan, India, China, of course. Not Japan, because Japan is signing in on the American war plans, I'm afraid, under this new, the female prime minister they now have. But anyway, that's my background. Bolin is really fantastic. So it's also a great read. He has made a small second book, which is called The War on Terror, and that adds some. And there's the free internet version of all his writings, from which I also took several things. And for instance, you mentioned this Unit 8200. Israeli signal intelligence unit that was involved in the work of the role of Alvin Krongard. Alvin Krongard was number 3 of the CIA at some point, but also a very important investment banker in the United States with Zionist background, who organized the CIA's investment company In-Q-Tel. Does that ring a bell with you?
Oh, yeah.
In-Q-Tel was set up, as a sort of venture capital operation on behalf of the CIA, so that the CIA would always have the most advanced technologies available through ownership. And that was a joint venture with Unit 8200. So all that reinforces the idea that, in my book, States of Emergency, I actually say that contemporary capitalism is being steered into, whatever direction it is going, by this triangle of intelligence, media, and IT operations. That is the leading fraction of capital, so to speak, which, let us say, like mass production industry in the 1950s, leads the whole drift of capitalism in a certain direction. And that triangle was established in the 1990s, when then it really became operational, so to speak. Of course, this is a bit of an abstract way of presenting it, but I hope you see the point. And it established itself as an Atlantic Zionist operation, taking the place of the Euro-Atlantic power bloc that preceded it, but which is now relegated to the dustbin of history almost, because we're deindustrializing, we are losing all kinds of assets that Europe used to have, and we're also succumbing to national disintegration in every member country of the European Union as a consequence of mass immigration, which continues. We have, in that sense, I think you and I will have the same view of, that you want to be a humanist and to have some solidarity with people who are coming over. But in this case, these people are simply the tool of a ruling class ploy to rob their societies of the capacity to resist, because When there's popular resistance, there must first be a people. And if the people is diluted in a sense by having so many people who don't speak your language, who have not a shred of a common history with you, popular resistance becomes a non-starter. And that's what we are feeling here very strongly.
Yeah, and on that last point, I've said before, I remember 20, 30 years ago, there was this figure on Croatian TV. I forget where he was from, Africa, Middle East, or Asia, and he learned Croatian, and everyone laughed, like in a good way. They were endeared by him. They accepted him. They look at this foreigner speaking Croatian. I here in Mexico, I'm Mexicans look at me. I'm an anti-imperialist foreigner who's integrated. That's how you do it. But last year, as you said, it's being done. You put it the best way. It's a ploy by the ruling class to take control over us. I was in Croatia last year for 3 months, and it was the first time ever that I'd seen. They have artificially flooded the country. Everywhere I go in Croatian shops and supermarkets, Venezuelans, Filipinos, Malaysians, Indians, Nepalese, Egyptians, like it's not normal. It's just a flood. And some of these people won't want to learn Croatian, and they are being used to complete this takeover of our countries by this supranational class and their supranational system they want to impose. And I want to switch gears a bit and ask you, because I think last time in your book you've alluded to this. If we compare COVID to Iran, because we have now an energy crisis, and we can say it's been manufactured and engineered by the West, right? They've started this crisis, Strait of Hormuz, and you're seeing the headlines literally saying, engineered crisis, new normal. Financial Times talking about we are in a new normal. Like it's literally what happened 5 years ago. Then Vietnam, Thailand, Denmark, UK, they're all telling their people to stay home, work from home, kind of like a lockdown. We need to ration energy and fuel. And at the same time, there was a report out of New Zealand saying because of this engineered energy crisis, more people are looking to buy electric vehicles. So again, it's almost like they're forcing us into these digital control systems through this crisis. Do you see any? Do you see this as potentially also being used by the class to continue that project of, Great Reset, or as as your book states, this permanent state of emergency to keep us in check?
Oh, there's no doubt about that. But the old idea of George Orwell, that wars in the modern times are no longer to defeat an enemy and conquer his land, but they are to control society and keep the existing order. And my feeling was already, and somebody reminded me of that the other day. My feeling in the COVID crisis was already that if this artificially generated fear campaign won't work to cow people into submission, then a real war is a real possibility. For the simple reason that you don't have to lie that a war is full of terrible dangers that may cost you your life. You don't have to have all these influencers and pundits to try and weave exotic narratives. Everybody will understand that this is extremely dangerous, and certainly when nuclear weapons would be used. And I've already seen mushroom clouds over Iran, but specialist people told me that these may be thermobaric bombs or semi-nuclear, very heavy explosives, etc. But fear is a normal reaction of people when the signs of war come closer. And again, as I say, our societies are no longer capable of organized resistance. I was just interviewed by somebody who said, how is it possible that the famous Dutch peace movement, which brought out hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people in the early 1980s against a new NATO strategy, where is it today? Well, for the simple reason that the society that produced that sort of people coming out, doesn't exist anymore. We have no organized working class anymore. There are no trade unions worth the name. They're all concerned with managing diversity, which means either the woke culture or integrating as many foreigners as possible. And again, I always hesitate because being a former communist, you don't want to let go of the ideal of internationalism, sharing a sort of bottom line with everybody of wanting a decent existence and so on and so forth. Except that the ruling class has outsmarted us on this topic, and if you start to look back, I know the literature on European integration, from my many years as a teacher. And I feel that this was always in the works. There was always the idea that a European citizen had to be formed. And now that even the United Nations recognizes that large parts of the world are becoming too old, Christine Lagarde of the formerly IMF and now the European Central Bank, she even said people live too long and pensions are too high. And by that she meant we need more young people who may be useless as they come, but their children, when they grow up in the country of arrival, they will be socialized into useful employees at all levels, and then we have a young workforce again to do the jobs for us. Those are the strategies that are being deployed, and ultimately my whole life I've worked on the structure of the ruling class, how it plans its actions, how it's divided into rival fractions, you name it. But of course, that always implies that you also look with one eye who is resisting this. And in the 1960s and 50s, there was still a trade union, socialist, communist resistance, really rooted in the population, rooted also in the social labor processes. And this has been diversified now to such an extent, also through immigration, but also through deindustrialization, displacing industry to Asia and all kind of cheap wage locations, that the level of resistance and the level of communication within potential resistance populations is reduced to a minimum. And that's what we're facing now. That is why there's no peace movement, because, for instance, we had Iranian exile groups here in Holland, and it's the same in other countries, who are here since the fall of the Shah. So they are here just as long as the theocratic regime in Tehran is in place after the Islamic Revolution. And they were dancing and waving Iranian flags because they thought that once the United States and Israel started bombing, it would soon be over with the Islamic rule. But that, of course, is not the case. That rule has deep social roots. If we wanted another Iran, we should have left Mossadegh in power in 1953. Then we had the ideal Iran that people are still dreaming of, and they forget that the regime of the Shah was an aberration, which initially was only there to undo whatever the nationalist government of Mossadegh had achieved or was going to achieve. Just as the rule of the mullahs is a response to the excesses of the repression under the Shah. So rule has veered in many different directions because it was always a reaction to another extreme. And that's why we're facing now a fairly extreme government, although I must say that I saw a video images of Tehran, and the idea that all women there are compulsory wearing hijab is not true. There were many, even blonde women who went in the street. Of course, it's a different matter in the countryside. But then I went to Turkey once to give a talk in Ankara. We went into the countryside for an outing, and my wife also had to wear some adjusted dress, not to draw the ire of the locals. And that's the same in Iran. There's an enormous difference between the cities and the countryside. In fact, that's everywhere. Even in a country like Holland, our countryside has a completely different composition, popular composition and cultural composition than the big cities. But that's only a small country.
I think it was important what you pointed out, comparing the governments of Khomeini and Shah and Mossadegh, and what really gets my ire are the lies. I think it was Lindsey Graham, Hegseth, or maybe Hegseth, but I think Lindsey Graham, who came out and said Iran started it, and then he starts talking about the 1980s. And I'm like, what are you talking about? We started it in 1953. They had a perfectly normal government, this nationalist, democratic Mossadegh, you can work with diplomatically. And we overthrew it and installed dictatorships. And then we go around saying we're promoting democracy. It's like a total Orwellian inversion. I can't stand it as an American. We're punching you in the face, and we're saying we're doing it in defense. You know, like what is this?
For your own best interests.
Yeah, we're punching you in the face for your own best interest. It's unbelievable. And I agree with you on Europe. I've always believed the project was to create this supranational globalist structure. Mario Draghi came out. They're almost there. They're calling for full federalization, and that's what they're discussing now, to get to that final point and to create a European Union army, to switch theaters. Ukraine, do you have any thought? It's almost like Ukraine has been put on the back burner. Do you have any thought on how that will play out, the US, Russia, Ukraine situation?
Yeah. Well, I wrote a book in 2019, which was called MH17, Ukraine and the New Cold War, Prism of Disaster. And that was a book on the prehistory of the conflict that was dramatized by the shooting down of Malaysian Airlines flight MH17. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that book was translated in many languages, actually, and also finally came out in Dutch under the title "The Tragedy of Ukraine: Europe as the Staging Area for the War Against Russia." And I think that sums it up. And it was also one of the last translations was into Polish, and also used that title. And apparently in Poland, that book plays a role in the launching of a peace movement, because the most important development that I see is the breakaway of the former East European countries, the former Soviet bloc countries. Also, by the way, Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, from the NATO line of confrontation with Russia. And that also has to do with the fact that these countries still have Russian speakers in their ranks, in their political class, and in their business class, who see opportunities to shift business from declining Western Europe to more or less ascendant Russia. and of course its BRICS partners, although this partnership itself is under stress now, with India being very neutral or even on the side of Israel. And basically the BRICS are being reduced to Russia and China, I would say, because they've even let down Iran in the United Nations vote. You may have seen that there was a UN resolution which condemned Iran's counterattack against American bases on the Arab side of the Gulf, without mentioning the fact that this was all started by US and Israel. And Russia and China abstained instead of using their veto. And they naively then came back with a resolution of their own, which made up for the omission of the US-Israeli aggression, and which was then, of course, struck by a US veto plus Latvia, I think, which happened to be on the Security Council. So, what is most surprising to me, one of the things that I mentioned in my book on the tragedy of Ukraine is a quote from Clausewitz. You know, Clausewitz, the famous early 19th century thinker on war, who said that to start a war in a reticent way, with showing goodwill to the enemy, is the greatest mistake that you can make. And that was the mistake that was made by Russia, with the idea that they were unfortunately forced to attack a brother country, and therefore we only come in with 130,000 men, whilst the defending side had almost 500,000, standing army and reserves. And so what you're seeing now, still today, is that Russian progress in the war is very limited, and they still have to absorb NATO initiated attacks and NATO monitored attacks with long range missiles. The other day, several British Storm Shadow missiles landed on targets in a chips factory for the missile production, and several refineries have already been hit. And it amazes me to what extent the Putin government is showing patience and a willingness to keep absorbing these hits, instead of finding a creative way, not risking, of course, having to be forced to use their overwhelming military superiority and call a general mobilization, but to find creative ways to punish Britain, for instance, in this case, for providing the necessary information to the Kiev regime to strike inside Russia. So in that sense, it's a bit of it's becoming a frozen conflict, just as in Transnistria, in Abkhazia, and the other part of Georgia that separated, Ossetia. So another frozen conflict. What is welcome, I think, is how these different conflicts interlock. So, for instance, Ukraine has been asked to send their interceptor missiles to the Middle East, but at the same time, they're using their interceptor missiles like mad. So yesterday there was another big missile and drone attack by Russia, and the majority of incoming aerial vehicles was shot down because they still stick to their interceptor missiles. But of course, at some point, these will all run out, because the United States now already withdrawing its interceptor missiles from South Korea. And production in the US military complex is not ready to help sustain an ongoing war effort, because they are in it for profit, and the profits are very high, and they only make these high profits in making the most exotic and expensive systems, military systems. And now that the largest U.S. Aircraft carrier is on fire with a number of planes already lost, I forget the name. I think it's Franklin Roosevelt. That is on fire in the Arabian Sea. Now, the whole idea of air superiority is changing its meaning, because it's no longer a matter of having an enormous fleet of jets and bombers. It's now a matter of having these missiles, especially hypersonic missiles. The latest Iranian one is flying at Mach 15, which is 15,000 kilometers per hour. And also, it also has an erratic route, so that missile defense cannot calculate where the missile will be in 10 seconds time, because it may not be there at all. For my book on 9/11, actually, I also used the interpretation of a Russian nuclear intelligence officer, that the Pentagon was hit by a missile of that type, a granite submarine missile, which flies at 2.5 Mach, which is not much, but in 2001 that was a lot already. And it showed the same type of behavior. So it made enormous erratic movements before hitting its target. And that had to do with outsmarting the missile defense. And that is what Iran is now doing, also with a whole range of missiles of their proper design and proper production. And that is why I think, since Iran, but also Hezbollah, which is much more dangerous to Israel itself, since they have an almost inexhaustible stock of missiles and make them themselves, that is why I think they can't be defeated. I mean, Ukraine will collapse at some point, because it's not a functioning democracy anymore, but it's still being supported by European taxpayers. So I can confess to you that even I, as a pensioned professor, is feeling the pinch of the tax pressure needed to sustain this effort of keeping up our support for Zelensky.
Yeah, and just to add, what you're highlighting, I think we're shifting to this future warfare, like in the movie Terminator, Skynet. I joke, and there was a recent article I was sharing from Intelligencer titled "We're in a New Kind of War," and it says it turns into a manufacturing contest. At the end of the day, drone warfare is about quantity, whose factories or allies can build the fastest. It's an industrial battle, and it goes on to say, strategically, it's easier and cheaper to play offense than defense in this kind of warfare. Each Iranian Shahed drone costs between $20,000 to $50,000 to produce, whereas one American Raytheon interceptor used to shoot down them costs $126,000. And in this process, all of these countries, Turkey, Ukraine, Russia, China, Iran, US, EU, they're developing their capacities to produce. It used to be like tens of thousands per year annually, for some of these countries. Then it was hundreds of thousands. Now we're talking millions, if not tens of millions per year per some of these countries. And the costs decline per each drone or missile. Yeah. So I feel like we're sliding now into this Skynet world of Terminator. And then they're bringing online autonomous Black Hawk choppers, helicopters, autonomous fighter jets, so on and so forth.
And also submarine drones.
And then humanoid robots and autonomous tanks. Let me ask you about, I think maybe we touched on this last time, but I always have this question, this contradiction where, and you kind of alluded to it regarding the Kremlin's disposition. How does it continue to be so naive? this horizontal versus vertical conflict, where we have, in many respects, all countries implementing, technological control systems, including Iran, but yet we see skirmishes with each other. So I kind of feel like it's these different factions of this international class in Russia, this international class in the West, this international class in Iran. They're implementing controls. I mean, here in Mexico, like the same thing Iran is doing, Mexico is doing, USA is doing, mandating now phone registry, biometrics, national digital IDs, movement controls, financial controls. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, no ruling class has ever voluntarily abdicated from its position. And if one of the ideas in this book that you kindly mentioned, states of emergency, which in other editions it's all called pandemic of fear. One of the ideas is that the internet revolution, so the information revolution in a broad sense, has potential effects comparable only to the invention of book printing in the Middle Ages, which fueled a series of revolutions, beginning with the Church Reformation, because now suddenly people could actually read a cheap version of the Bible in their own language. Now, that is a revolution that is still resonating in many ways. Before that, you had a Catholic priest speaking in Latin and interpreting the Bible in his own way. Now, this information revolution that we're seeing now, that really took off in the 1990s, has a democratic potential, but mainly it is being appropriated by the ruling classes. They are also seeing that this is their last chance, so to speak, to retain power and completely disempower the population. If they can control the struggle over the internet now is in full swing. The Digital Services Act in Europe means that under the guise of protecting children and that sort of thing, which they don't do at all, of course. Think of the Epstein revelations. Under the guise of protecting children, they're basically trying to control the internet as a tool of repression. And I must say that for the moment, they're succeeding to that extent that every society consists of three segments. One is a segment of enthusiastic embracement of the ruling class positions. These are the cadres who work for them, who are the specialists, highly rewarded, serving the billionaire class. Then you have the large category in the middle, the 60%. Who are just looking at things, trying to get on with their lives and so on and so forth. And at the bottom, you have the 20%, which is conscious of what's going on and which is resisting. And my feeling is that this resisting group, this layer in society of the 20% potential opposition and also conscious opposition has not been defeated yet. It was very evident that such an opposition existed in the COVID. I mean, it's not always exactly 20%, but just as a rule of thumb number, and that in the case of war, we have the same. That again, there's a 20% layer who understand that what we are being told is actually not what's happening, and that we must organize. Except that one of the drawbacks of the internet is that you get the internet warriors. So people are not easily brought out in the street any longer because they think that just signing a protest petition is enough and shows how strong we are. So in that sense, we need an organizational dimension which brings out the potential for resistance, because the real struggle in politics is always about this middle 60%. The middle 60% either goes along with the mainstream and the ruling class position, or it becomes sensitive to what the 20% opposition is saying. But that requires that the case for opposition must be extremely clear, and people must suffer from the situation as it unfolds in any particular development. So, for instance, the rise of energy prices and the stagnation that will occur in society, and as I said, Europe will be the part of the world that is paying the greatest price, especially now that Africa is emancipating in a most surprising way. The Sahel countries, Traoré and Burkina Faso. I just read about Mali. Senegal has now also nationalized part of its foreign corporate assets. So Africa is no longer the waste paper basket of world events. They are taking their future into their own hands. Europe, will be the loser. And in that situation, it may be that the 20% potential opposition gets a hearing among the large 60% middle bloc, because people will be struggling to pay their energy bills. And if that happens, there will be a real chance for smart organizers to get large parts of that middle bloc into movement. But that, of course, will require smart organizers, and that will require a more ideological commitment. But basically, you might also say that the ideological commitment should never go too far, but should also be limited to the right to lead a normal life. And if that becomes the issue, then your chances as an opposition movement are best.
So there's some hope. You're giving us some hope here, and we should never continue. We should never stop resisting. Is there any other issue that I haven't brought up, or that you think is important in this moment right now? As we covered a lot of these globally important issues.
No, I think what I've said is. I don't have to tell you anything about the Western Hemisphere, and especially what's going on in Latin America. I mean, the Venezuela issue has touched me very deeply. I just read today that Maduro and his wife were really sold out by elements within the security structure of Venezuela, on the promise of getting a $40 million reward, and that Trump betrayed these traitors in a most crude way that only he can do, in the sense that he left them there. The Americans didn't abduct or bring to safety, if you will, the Venezuelan traitors who sold out, but also there was no payout. So the 40 billion has never come. And that's a typical Trump, I would say. But I really sympathize with. I just read that Maduro is now living in a cell of 3 by 2 meters, and is allowed out for air every 2 or 3 days. And I found so humiliating and so incomprehensible how Delcy Rodriguez, his second, as his replacement as a now acting president, she has established relations with the United States. And there was a photo on Telesur, with her, smiling to the American ambassador who has returned. The first oil tanker that left Venezuela with the consent of the Americans was going to Israel. Now, you can't figure it out for yourself to make it more cruel and more humiliating if you know the positions of Maduro, and also formerly the Rodriguez. But apparently she has been forced into submission by the threat of an all-out war against Venezuela, although maybe now maybe the outcome of what happens in Iran may also alleviate the pressure on Venezuela. But then there's also the pressure on Cuba. I mean, I've been to Cuba. I've given a talk at the university in Havana, unforgettable event. And to know that that country now is that there are riots because people want to eat, they want to have light, and there have even been attacks on Communist Party bureaus. I find that very upsetting, but there's nothing that I can add to that. But it shows you that in the world of today, all these theaters of conflict hang together, and that ultimately we're looking at a historic defeat and decline of the West and the United States in particular. I was at a I don't go to conferences that much, but I was at a fantastic event in Paris at the Académie de Géopolitical on the BRICS, the role of the BRICS in the world affairs. And there was a Polish guy who said, the United States is declining in the long run, but still very short in the short run, very strong in the short run. And that makes the current situation so dangerous. The Americans know that either now they strike down all their enemies and defeat and destroy them, or they will be spectators in seeing their own type of society going down the drain. And I think we're in the midst of that very dangerous situation.
I would agree. I often beg that question. How strong is the empire? Is it gaining strength, or is it, as you say, are we in the eye of the storm, and is it going to collapse? So I guess we'll see. And yeah, that was actually one of my last questions for you, America and Venezuela. And as you mentioned, Delcy, it was reported at the beginning of the month, she was trying to push back, and America, Washington said they were turning up the heat on Delcy. So if she didn't do what they said, I don't know what that heat exactly was. And then a day later or two, the same Reuters repeated that, what do you know? Delcy signed off on the oil. So they pressured her. And then, when you're under that intense pressure, either you die, you go to jail, or you do what they tell you. And so the empire, and you can't, that's hilarious. I didn't know that story that you mentioned about the traders in Venezuela. Never trust the empire. never trust the empire. Even though I'm a citizen of both of the empires, the EU, which is an empire, according to Wolfgang Streeck, Austrian academic, and the U.S.
I know. Yeah.
Do not trust the empire. Kees, thank you for the update. Any final thought, as well as where are the best places people can follow you? I follow you're on X, your X account. They can get your books, correct?
Yeah, and I also have an academia.edu page. You know that? And there I will post information on my forthcoming book, Israel and 9/11. I had a more exotic title, but then when the United States and Israel attacked Iran, I thought, no, I have to put it straight away as it is, Israel and 9/11, to make it more provocative. And I think it comes out just at the right time, because it has this whole prehistory, beginning with the origins of Ashkenazi Jewry, and their tradition of enmity with the environment, etc., which doesn't exist at all in the Muslim world towards Jews. They've always been Abrahamic religions, co-religionists, whereas the Ashkenazis have had a history of the ghetto, ultimately of the Nazi genocide, and they brought that tradition of enmity to Israel as a state. And from day one, Israel had been at war with its neighbors. And after 1973, which was a narrow escape, they began to think about making the United States fight Israel's wars. And that's what we're seeing now.
Well, I hope you're ready for the flack you're going to get after publishing that book. I'll include I'll include all the links in the description, your X account where people can get your books and your academia. And so Good luck.
Great.
Good luck, and thanks for coming back on the podcast.
Okay. Well, thank you, Froj.